Kia ora. Welcome to Campfire Stories. My name is Rose, and I'm from the Christchurch City Libraries. And I'm reading The Moving Finger by Agatha Christie. So far we've met quite a few casts of characters in this story about people receiving quite awful anonymous letters. This chapter we're going to meet some new people. Chapter 5. I see that there has been one omission in my story. So far, I have made little or no mention of Mrs. Dane Calthrop, or indeed of the Reverend Caleb Dane Calthrop. And yet both the vicar and his wife were distinct personalities. Dane Calthrop himself was perhaps a being more remote from everyday life than anyone I have ever met. His existence was in his books and in his study, and in his intimate knowledge of early church history. Mrs. Dane Calthrop, on the other hand, was quite terrifyingly on the spot. I have perhaps purposely put off mentioning her because I was from the first a little afraid of her. She was a woman of character and of almost Olympian knowledge. She was not in the least the typical vicar's wife, but that, as I set it down, makes me ask myself, what do I know of vicars' wives? The only one I remember well was a quiet, nondescript creature devoted to a big, strong husband with a magnetic way of preaching. She had so little general conversation that it was a puzzle to know how to sustain a conversation with her. Otherwise, I was depending on the fictional presentment of vicars' wives, caricatures of females poking their noses everywhere and uttering platitudes. Probably no such type exists. Mrs. Dane Calthrop never poked her nose in anywhere, yet she had an uncanny power of knowing things, and I soon discovered that almost everyone in the village was slightly afraid of her. She gave no advice and never interfered, yet she represented, to an uneasy conscience, the deity personified. I have never seen a woman more indifferent to her material surroundings. On hot days she would stride about clad in Harris tweed, and in rain or even sleet, I have seen her absently-mindedly race down the village street in a cotton dress of printed poppies. She had a long, thin, well-bred face like a greyhound, and a most devastating sincerity of speech. She stopped me in the high street the day after Megan had come to lunch. I had the usual feeling of surprise, because Mrs. Dane Calthrop's progress resembled coursing more than walking, and her eyes were always fixed on the distant horizon, so you felt sure that her real objective was about 1.5 miles away. "Oh," she said, "Mr. Burton." She said it rather triumphantly, as someone might who had solved a particularly clever puzzle. I admitted that I was Mr. Burton, and Mrs. Dane Calthrop stopped focusing on the horizon and seemed to be trying to focus on me instead. "Now what," she said, "did I want to see you about?" I could not help her there. She stood frowning, deeply perplexed. "Something rather nasty," she said. "Oh, I'm sorry about that," I said, startled. "Ah," cried Mrs. Dane Calthrop, "I hate my love with an A. That's it, anonymous letters. What's this story you've brought down here about anonymous letters?" "I didn't bring it," I said. "It was here already." "Nobody got any until you came, though," said Mrs. Dane Calthrop accusingly. "But they did, Mrs. Dane Calthrop. The trouble had already started." "Oh dear," said Mrs. Dane Calthrop. "I don't like that." She stood there, her eyes absent and far away again. She said, "I can't help feeling it's all wrong. We're not like that here. Envy, of course, and malice, and all the mean, spiteful little sins. But I didn't think there was anyone who would do that. No, really, I didn't. And it distresses me, you see, because I ought to know." Her fine eyes came back from the horizon and met mine. They were worried and seemed to hold the honest bewilderment of a child. "How should you know?" I said. "I usually do. I've always felt that it's my function. Caleb preaches good sound doctrine and administers the sacraments. That's a priest's duty. But if you admit marriage at all for a priest, then I think his wife's duty is to know what people are feeling and thinking, even if she can't do anything about it. and I haven't the least idea whose mind is—" She broke off, adding absently, "They are such silly letters too." "Have you had any yourself?" I was a little diffident of asking, but Mrs. Dane Calthrop replied perfectly naturally, her eyes opening a little wider. "Oh yes, 2. Oh no, 3. I forget exactly what they said. Something very silly about Caleb and the schoolmistress, I think, quite absurd, because Caleb has absolutely no taste for fornication. He never has had. So lucky being a clergyman." "Quite," I said. "Oh, quite." "Caleb would have been a saint," said Mrs. Dane Calthrop, "if he hadn't been just a too little intellectual." I did not feel qualified to answer this criticism, and anyway, Mrs. Dane Calthrop went on, leaping back from her husband to the letters in a rather puzzling way. "There are so many things the letters might say, but don't. That's what's so curious." "I should hardly have thought that they erred on the side of restraint," I said bitterly, "but they don't seem to know anything, none of the real things." "You mean?" Those vague eyes met mine. "Well, of course, there's plenty of adultery here, and everywhere everything else. Any amount of shameful secrets. Why doesn't the writer use those?" She paused and then abruptly, "What did they say in your letter?" "They suggested that my sister wasn't my sister." "And she is?" Mrs. Dane Calthrop asked the question with unembarrassed friendly interest. "Certainly Joanna is my sister." Mrs. Dane Calthrop nodded her head. "That just shows you what I mean. I dare say there are other things." Her clear, uninterested eyes looked at me thoughtfully, and I suddenly understood why Lymstock was afraid of Mrs. Dane Calthrop. In everybody's life there are hidden chapters which they hope may never be known. I felt that Mrs. Dane Calthrop knew them. For once in my life I was positively delighted when Amy Griffith's hearty voice boomed out, "Hello, Maud. Glad I've just caught you. I want to suggest an alteration of date for sale of work. Morning, Mr. Burton." She went on, "I must just pop into the grocer's and leave my order. Then I'll come along to the Institute if that suits you." Yes, that will do quite well," said Mrs. Dane Calthrop. Amy Griffith went into the international stores. Mrs. Dane Calthrop said, "Poor thing." I was puzzled. Surely she could not be pitying Amy. She went on, however, "You know, Mr. Burton, I'm rather afraid—" "About this letter business?" "Yes, you see, it must mean—" She paused, lost in thought, her eyes screwed up. Then she slowly said, as one who solves a problem, "Blind hatred. Yes, blind hatred. But even a blind man might stab to the heart by pure chance. And what would happen then, Mr. Burton?" We were to know that before another day had passed. It was Partridge who brought the news of the tragedy. Partridge enjoys calamity. Her nose always twitches ecstatically when she has to break bad news of any kind. She came into Joanna's room with her nose working overtime, her eyes bright, and her mouth pulled down into exaggerated gloom. "There's terrible news this morning, miss," she observed as she drew up the blinds. It takes a minute or two for Joanna, with her London habits, to become fully conscious in the morning. She said, "Oh," and rolled over without real interest. Partridge placed her early tea beside her and began again. "Terrible it is, shocking. I couldn't hardly believe it when I heard." "What's terrible?" said Joanna, struggling into wakefulness. "Poor Mrs. Symington." She paused dramatically. "Dead." "Dead?" Joanna sat up in bed, now wide awake. "Yes, miss, yesterday afternoon, and what's worse, took her own life." "Oh no, Partridge!" Joanna was really shocked. Mrs. Symington was not, somehow, the sort of person you associated with tragedies. "Yes, miss, it's the truth. Did it deliberate. Not but what she drove to his poor soul." "Drove to it?" Joanna had an inkling of the truth then. "Not—" Her eyes questioned Partridge, and Partridge nodded. "That's right, miss. One of them nasty letters." What did it say? But that, to Partridge's regret, she had not succeeded in learning. "They're beastly things," said Joanna, "but I don't see why they should make one want to kill oneself." Partridge sniffed and then said with meaning, "Not unless they were true, miss." "Oh," said Joanna. She drank her tea after Partridge had left the room. Then she threw on a dressing gown and came in to tell me the news. I thought of what Owen Griffith had said. Sooner or later the shot in the dark went home. It had done with Mrs. Symington. She, apparently the most unlikely of women, had had a secret. It was true, I reflected, that for all her shrewdness, she was not a woman of much stamina. She was the anemic, clinging type that crumples easily. Joanna nudged me and asked me what I was thinking about. I repeated to her what Owen had said. "Of course," said Joanna waspishly, "he would know all about it. That man thinks he knows everything." "He's clever," I said. "He's conceited," said Joanna. She added, "abominably conceited." After a minute or two she said, "How awful for her husband and for the girl. What do you think Megan will feel about it?" I hadn't the slightest idea and said so. It was curious that one could never gauge what Megan would think or feel. Joanna nodded and said, "No, one never does know with changelings." After a minute or two she said, I wonder if she'd like to come and stay with us for a day or two. It's rather a shock for a girl that age." "We might go along and suggest it," I agreed. "The children are all right," said Joanna. "They've got that governess woman, but I expect she's just the sort of creature that would drive someone like Megan mad." I thought that was very possible. I could imagine Elsie Holland uttering platitude after platitude and suggesting innumerable cups of tea. A kindly creature, but not, I thought, the person for a sensitive girl. I had thought myself of bringing Megan away, and I was glad that Joanna had thought of it spontaneously without prompting it from me. We went down to the Symingtons' house after breakfast. We were a little nervous, both of us. Our arrival might look like sheer ghoulish curiosity. Luckily, we met Owen Griffith just coming out through the gate. He looked worried and preoccupied. He greeted me, however, with some warmth. "Oh, hello, Burton. I'm glad to see you. What I was afraid would happen sooner or later has happened. Damnable business." "Good morning, Dr. Griffith," said Joanna, using the voice she keeps for one of our deafer aunts. Griffith started and flushed. Oh, good morning, Miss Barton." "I thought perhaps," said Joanna, "that you didn't see me." Owen Griffith got redder still. His shyness enveloped him like a mantle. I'm so sorry, preoccupied. I didn't." Joanna went on mercilessly. "After all, I am life-size." "Merely Kit-Kat," I said in a stern aside to her. Then I went on. "My sister and I, Griffith, wondered whether it would be a good thing if the girl came and stopped with us for a day or two. What do you think? I don't want to butt in, but it must be rather grim for the poor child. What would Symington feel about it, do you think?" Griffith turned the idea over in his mind for a moment or two. "I think it would be an excellent thing," he said at last. "She's a queer, nervy sort of girl, and it would be a good thing for her to get away from the whole thing. Miss Holland is doing wonders. She has an excellent head on her shoulders, but she really has quite enough to do with the two children and Symington himself. He's quite broken up, bewildered." "It was," I suggested, "suicide?" Griffith nodded. "Oh, yes, no question of accident. She wrote, 'I can't go on a scrap of paper. The letter must have come by yesterday's post." The envelope was down on the floor by her chair, and the letter itself was screwed up into a ball and thrown into the fireplace. "What did—" I stopped, rather horrified at myself. "I beg your pardon," I said. Griffith gave a quick, unhappy smile. "You needn't mind asking. That letter will have to be read at the inquest. No getting out of it, more's the pity. It was the usual kind of thing, couched in the same foul style. The specific accusation was that the second boy, Colin, was not Symington's child." "Do you think that was true?" I exclaimed incredulously. Griffith shrugged his shoulder. "I've no means of forming a judgment. I've only been here 5 years. As far as I'm seen, the Symingtons were a placid, happy couple devoted to each other. And their children. It's true that the boy doesn't particularly resemble his parents. He's got bright red hair for one thing, but a child often throws back in appearance to a grandfather or grandmother. That lack of resemblance might have been what prompted the particular accusation, a foul and quite uncalled for bow at a venture. Very likely, in fact probably, there's not been much accurate knowledge behind these poison pen letters, just unbridled spite and malice. But it happened to hit the bull's-eye, said Joanna. After all, she wouldn't have killed herself otherwise, would she? Griffith said doubtfully, I'm not quite sure. She's been ailing in health for some time, neurotic, hysterical. I've been treating her for a nervous condition. It's possible, I think, that the shock of receiving such a letter couched in those terms may have induced such a state of panic and despondency that she may have decided to take her life. She may have worked herself up to feel that her husband might not believe her if she denied the story, and the general shame and disgust might have worked upon her so powerfully as to temporarily unbalance her judgment. Suicide whilst of unsound mind, said Joanna. Exactly. I shall be quite justified, I think, in putting forward that point of view at the inquest. I see, said Joanna. There was something in her voice which made Owen say, perfectly justified, in an angry voice. He added, You don't agree, Miss Burton? Oh, yes, I do, said Joanna. I'd do exactly the same in your place. Owen looked at her doubtfully, then moved slowly away down the street. Joanna and I went on into the house. The front door was open, and it seemed easier than ringing the bell, especially as we heard Elsie Holland's voice inside. She was talking to Mr. Symington, who, huddled in a chair, was looking completely dazed. No, but really, Mr. Symington, you must take something. You haven't had any breakfast, not what I call proper breakfast, and nothing to eat last night, and what with the shock and all, you'll be getting ill yourself, and you'll need all your strength. The doctor said so before he left. Symington said in a toneless voice, You're very kind, Miss Holland, but... A nice cup of hot tea, said Elsie Holland, thrusting the beverage on him firmly. Personally, I should have given the poor devil a stiff whisky and soda. He looked as though he needed it. However, he accepted the tea, and looking up at Elsie Holland, I can't thank you for all you've done and are doing, Miss Holland. You've been perfectly splendid. The girl flushed and looked pleased. It's nice of you to say that, Mr. Symington. You must let me do all I can to help. Don't worry about the children. I'll see to them, and I've got the servants calmed down, and if there's anything I can do, letter writing or telephoning, don't hesitate to ask me. You're very kind, Symington said again. Elsie Holland, turning, caught sight of us and came hurrying out into the hall. Isn't it terrible? She said in a hushed whisper. I thought as I looked at her that she really was a very nice girl, kind, competent, practical in an emergency. Her magnificent blue eyes were just faintly rimmed with pink, showing that she had been soft-hearted enough to shed tears for her employer's death. Can we speak to you a minute? Asked Joanna. We don't want to disturb Mr. Symington. Elsie Holland nodded comprehendingly and led the way into the dining room on the other side of the hall. It's been awful for him, she said. Such a shock. Who would have ever thought a thing like this could happen? But I do, of course, realise now that she had been queer for some time, awfully nervy and weepy. I thought it was her health, though Dr. Griffith always said there was nothing really wrong with her. But she was snappy and irritable, and some days you wouldn't know just how to take her. What we really came for, said Joanna, was to know whether we could have Megan for a few days. That is, if she'd like to come. Elsie Holland looked rather surprised. Megan? She said doubtfully. I don't know, I'm sure. I mean, it's ever so kind of you, but she's such a queer girl. One never knows what she's going to say or feel about things. Joanna said rather vaguely, We thought it might be a help, perhaps. Oh, well, as far as that goes, it would. I mean, I've got the boys to look after. They're with Cook just now, and poor Mr. Symington, he really needs looking after as much as anyone, and such a lot to do and see to. I really haven't had time to see much to Megan. I think she's upstairs in the old nursery at the top of the house. She seems to want to get away from everyone. I don't know if... Joanna gave me the faintest of looks. I slipped quickly out of the room and upstairs. The old nursery was at the top of the house. I opened the door and went in. The room downstairs had given onto the garden behind, and the blinds had not been down there. But in this room, which faced the road, they were decorously drawn down. Through a dim grey gloom, I saw Megan. She was crouching on a divan set against the far wall, and I was reminded at once of some terrified animal hiding. She looked petrified with fear. "Megan," I said. I came forward and unconsciously I adopted the tone one does adopt when you want to reassure a frightened animal. "I'm really surprised I didn't hold out a carrot or a piece of sugar. I felt like that." She stared at me, but she did not move, and her expression did not alter. "Megan," I said again, "Joanna and I have come to ask you if you would like to come and stay for us for a little." Her voice came hollowly out of the dim twilight. "Stay with you? In your house?" "Yes." "You mean you'll take me away from here?" "Yes, my dear." Suddenly she began to shake all over. It was frightening and very moving. "Oh, do take me away, please do. It's so awful being here and feeling so wicked." I came over to her and her hands fastened on my coat sleeve. "I'm an awful coward. I didn't know what a coward I was." "It's all right, funny face," I said. "These things are a bit shattering. Come along. Can we go at once without waiting a minute?" "Well, you'll have to put a few things together, I suppose." "What sort of things? Why?" "My dear girl," I said, "we can provide you with a bed and a bath and the rest of it, but I'm damned if I lend you my toothbrush." She gave a very faint, weak little laugh. "I see. I think I'm stupid today. You mustn't mind. I'll go and pack some things. You won't go away? You'll wait for me?" "I'll be on the mat." Thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm so stupid, but you see, it's rather dreadful when your mother dies." "I know," I said. I gave her a friendly pat on the back, and she flashed me a grateful look and disappeared into a bedroom. I went on downstairs. "I found Megan," I said. "She's coming." "Oh, now that is a good thing," exclaimed Elsie Holland. "It will take her out of herself. She's rather a nervy girl, you know. Difficult. It will be a great relief to feel I haven't got her on my mind as well as everything else. It's very kind of you, Miss Burton. I hope she won't be a nuisance. Oh dear, there's the telephone. I must go and answer it. Mr. Symington isn't fit." She hurried out of the room. Joanna said, "Quite the ministering angel." "You said that rather nastily," I observed. "She's a nice, kind girl and obviously most capable." "Most, and she knows it." "That is unworthy of you, Joanna," I said. "Meaning why shouldn't the girl do her stuff?" "Exactly." "I never can stand seeing people pleased with themselves," said Joanna. "It arouses all my worst instincts." "How did you find Megan?" "Crouching in a darkened room, looking rather like a stricken gazelle." "Poor gid. She was quite willing to come?" "She leapt at it." A series of thuds out in the hall announced the descent of Megan and her suitcase. I went out and took it from her. Joanna, behind me, said urgently, "Come on, I've already refused some nice hot tea twice." We went out to the car. It annoyed me that Joanna had to sling the suitcase in. I could get along with one stick now, but I couldn't do any athletic feats. "Get in," I said to Megan. She got in. I followed her. Joanna started the car and we drove off. We got to Little Furze and went into the drawing room. Megan dropped into a chair and burst into tears. She cried with the hearty fervour of a child. Bawled, I think, is the right word. I left the room in search of a remedy. Joanna stood by, feeling rather helpless, I think. Presently I heard Megan say in a thick, choked voice, "I'm sorry for doing this. It seems idiotic." Joanna said kindly, "Not at all. Have another handkerchief." I gather she supplied the necessary article. I re-entered the room and handed Megan a brimming glass. "What is it?" "A cocktail," I said. "Is it? Is it really?" Megan's tears were instantly dried. "I've never drunk a cocktail." "Everything has to have a beginning," I said. Megan sipped her drink gingerly, then a beaming smile spread over her face. She tilted her head back and gulped it down at a draught. "It's lovely," she said. "Can I have another?" "No," I said. "Why not?" "In about 10 minutes you'll probably know." "Oh." Megan transferred her attention to Joanna. "I really am awfully sorry for having made such a nuisance of myself howling away like that. I can't think why. It seems awfully silly when I'm so glad to be here." "That's all right," said Joanna. "We're very pleased to have you." "You can't be really. It's just kindness on your part, but I am grateful." "Please don't be grateful," said Joanna. "It will embarrass me. I was speaking the truth when I said we should be glad to have you. Jerry and I have used up all our conversation. We can't think of any more things to say to each other." "But now," I said, "we shall be able to have all sorts of interesting discussions about Goneril and Regan and things like that." Megan's face lit up. "I've been thinking about that, and I think I know the answer. It was because that awful old father of theirs always insisted on such a lot of sucking up. When you've always got to be saying thank you and how kind and all the rest of it, it would make you go a bit rotten and queer inside, and you'd just long to be able to be beastly for a change. And when you got the chance, you'd probably find it went to your head and you'd go too far. Old Lear was pretty awful, wasn't he? I mean, he did deserve the snub Cordelia gave him." "I can see," I said, "that we are going to have many interesting discussions about Shakespeare." "I can see you two are going to be very highbrow," said Joanna. "I'm afraid I always find Shakespeare terribly dreary. All those long scenes where everybody is drunk and it's supposed to be funny." "Talking of drink," I said, turning to Megan, "how are you feeling?" "Quite all right, thank you." "Not at all giddy? You don't see two of Joanna or anything like that?" "No, I just feel as though I'd like to talk rather a lot." "Splendid," I said. "Obviously you are one of our natural drinkers. That is to say, if that really was your first cocktail." "Oh, it was." "A good strong head is an asset to any human being," I said. Joanna took Megan upstairs to unpack. Partridge came in looking sour and said she had made 2 cup custards for lunch, and what should she do about it? Well, that's the end of chapter 5. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.